Hey guys, what's up? It's Derek, and in today's video, I'm going to show you guys the best settings for the Canon EOS M200 if you're looking to use it as a webcam replacement for your live stream. I've been messing around with this camera for a little while now, and I think I have found what is, in my opinion, the best settings for this if you're going to use it as your main camera for your live stream on Twitch TV or any other live streaming platform that you use. With that said, roll the intro. Alright guys, like I said, I'm going to jump into the camera menu system here on the Canon EOS M200 and walk you guys through the exact settings that I'm using for my live stream when I use this camera as my webcam replacement. Before we jump into the camera settings and before I show it on screen here, first, just let me remind you that if you have any questions after watching this video or you need help at all with setting this up, if you're new to using DSLR type cameras or mirrorless cameras as the Canon EOS M200, feel free to stop in my live stream URL here on the screen or down in the description below. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into the Canon EOS M200 menu here, and I will walk you guys through the best settings that I found for using this camera as a webcam. All right, guys, so here we are inside the camera, and we're going to go ahead and walk you through what, in my opinion, is the best settings, as I said, for the Canon EOS M200 if you're using it as a webcam replacement for your live stream. All right, first, let's go ahead and jump into the menu of the camera by hitting the menu button. So we're going to just go through each screen here on the camera, and I'm going to show you guys the settings that I found that work best. Just FYI, I'm not saying that these are the absolute best settings out there. In fact, if you have anything that you do different that you found that works better, please leave a comment down in the comment section down below and share with us what you found. You might help some other people out. However, with that said, these are the best settings that I've found for this camera to make sure that you're getting the best results out of it. All right, so first things first, the shooting mode you want to make sure is set to movie manual exposure. By default, it's set to movie auto exposure, but we do not want the exposure to adjust automatically. The reason for that is because you then have it kind of pulsate at times if you have it set to auto exposure, because that exposure will adjust, so you'll get kind of adjustments in your lighting. For example, maybe you turn down the lighting in your room and you want it to actually look darker in your background and on your camera. If you have auto exposure set, that's not going to happen. Secondly, for the movie record quality, this depends on whether you're doing 30 frames per second or whether you're doing 60 frames per second. My live stream, I do 60 frames per second, so I want my camera to match that. So I'm going to use 1080p at 59.94 frames per second. You can go down to 720p, 59.94 frames per second if you're streaming at 720, 60 frames per second. If you're streaming at 1080p, 30 frames per second, you can select that. You do not want to do 4K, in my opinion, even though this camera offers it, mainly because even if you're only streaming at 30 frames per second, at 4K, this camera only outputs at 23.98 or 24 frames per second. So in my opinion, you'd be better off going with 1080p, 30 frames per second, and matching your live stream, or 1080p, 60 frames per second, which is what I do. So you can see here that that's what I will select. Next up, movie self-timer, we're going to leave to off, and the sound recording we can leave as auto. We're not actually using the sound for this, so we will not even mess with it. The lens aberration correction, this is actually up to you as the streamer. What this does is using a wide angle lens, so the kit lens on this camera is a 15 to 45 millimeter. If you're at 15 millimeter, and this is true with any wide angle lens, you'll notice on the edges of your lens, you'll get a little bit of a distortion. So by having this peripheral illume correction on, that'll fix those edges so that they don't kind of look warped like you'll see sometimes with wide angle lenses. However, you do sacrifice a little itty bitty tiny bit of the wide angle if you turn this on. To me, I'd rather have nice, clean, straight edges, so I personally leave this on. You do not really notice that much of a change. It does not affect it that much. However, if you want the absolute widest angle that you can get, you're going to want to turn this to off. Again, as I said, I use it on. I'd rather have the nice straight edges. I should also point out, with that said, that everything in this video is assuming that you are using the kit lens that comes with the Canon EOS M200 and not a secondary lens, as most people that buy this camera, I believe, would be using that. All right, over here on the second menu of the camera option, remote control, we're going to leave as enabled. Most of you are probably not using a remote control, so this probably doesn't matter. But either way, it doesn't matter whether it's on or off for live streaming. On the third page, we're going to leave the exposure compensation at 0. We're going to leave the ISO speed settings as to default what they're set at. Auto light and optimizer, I turn this to off because I do not want the camera to automatically do anything with my exposure. Next, we're going to leave highlight tone priority off, and we're going to leave the meter and timer to 8 seconds. Onto the fourth screen, we're going to leave our auto white balance. This is also kind of a user decision. I use auto white balance. This makes sure that my skin tones and everything stay correct. If your lighting does not change at all during your scene, meaning that if you're not ever dimming your lights, or you don't have a window or anything that shines on you that as the sun sets might change your lighting, you would actually be better off setting this to something that doesn't change. That way, again, you know, your color of your skin and stuff does not automatically change during your live stream. You can set this, you know, daylight if you're using a window or something shade, or you can go over here to the Kelvin, the K, and you can automatically set this using your thing till you kind of find what looks best for your skin tone. I leave this to auto because my lighting does change. Some games, like Dead by Daylight, for example, I like to play that with the lights off. And sometimes I have my lights on full brightness, and sometimes I dim them down. So because my lighting changes depending on the game that I play, for me, it just works best to leave this set as auto. White balance correction and custom white balance, you won't need to change those if you're changing it in the white balance itself there under the Kelvin. Picture style, I leave to, picture style, I changed to portrait because I want it to soften. That's the first one, is the S. I want it to soften everything just a bit. It helps get out some of the, imperfections in your face and stuff. So picture style, I found portrait works best for that. All right, menu 5. The autofocus method, I leave to autofocus with tracking. As you can see, that's what it's set on to. So that auto focuses and continues to track my face if I'm moving around in the frame. Eye detection autofocus I leave enabled because typically what most streamers like to do is have a very low aperture, which gives you a very low depth of field so that you're in focus but the background behind you is out of focus. So it can be very easy to get your face a little bit out of focus if you're using a low aperture. So I like the eye auto detection because even if there's a part of my face that gets out of focus just a touch with the tracking of the autofocus, at least I know my eyes, which typically is the most important thing to have in focus at all times, is always going to be in focus. Movie servo autofocus I have enabled. That means that the camera will continuously track you as you move around and try to keep everything in focus. Focus mode, obviously we're going to be in autofocus. And then last but not least, HDMI info display. This is currently set to on my screen because I'm recording this video and showing you guys. However, you want to make sure that you're using a clean FHD output. Again, we don't want to do 4K because it limits it at 30 frames per second, which you might be streaming at 60 frames per second. And in my opinion, others might disagree. I think it's best to always match everything. So if you're streaming at 60 frames per second, you're better off being able to have that 60 frames per second output from your camera as well. With 4K, the max it'll do is 30K out. Again, I'm not going to change this here now because I'm recording this video, so we want to leave it with the info on so you can see everything that I'm doing. All right, and last but not least, menu 6, the lens electronic manual focus. We don't need to mess with that. And the last thing we need to mess with is the image stabilizer settings. So I've noticed a lot of people talking about this camera, and they'll compare it to the Sony a5100, which makes sense because they're kind of comparable, and it's kind of they're the two most popular options for starter entry level cameras to use for live streaming and for content creation. And a lot of people have mentioned that with the Sony a5100, even though the kit lenses, the Canon should be a touch wider with the 15 millimeter, that it's not. And I think what a lot of people are doing is not turning this image stabilizer mode to off. If you have this on, and right now I'm going to put on the screen as I'm clicking this on, a video clip where it shows with this on, and then I'm going to go ahead now and switch to a video clip where this is off, and you can see how much wider the frame is when this image stabilizer mode is turned on or off. So as you can see, having this set to off widens up that lens even more. And since you're most likely going to have your camera set up on a tripod, there's no need for you to have image stabilizer turned on. All right, guys, and now that we have that turned off, that's everything that we need to do in the settings of the camera to get what is, in my opinion, the best settings that you can use when you're live streaming and using this as a webcam. And now I want to go back to the actual camera mode here. And again, we should have the camera set to manual everything. So I want to show you guys the settings that I use. If you're doing 60 frames per second at 1080p or at 720, you should have your shutter speed, which is what I'm adjusting right here, set to double your frame rate. So that would be 125. Obviously, that's not exactly double. However, you know, cameras, you can only use the settings that they have. So you just want to match it up as close as possible. So if you're using 30 frames per second, that would mean that you want to have a frame rate or a shutter speed of 1/60 if you're doing 30 frames per second. So 30 frames per second, you want a shutter speed of 1/60. 60 frames per second, you want a shutter speed of 125. All right. For your aperture, you want to do it the lowest that your lens can do. With the kit lens, that would be 3.5 for your aperture. This is the number that allows you to have yourself in focus and have everything behind you, your background, out of focus, kind of blurred a little bit. That professional look that a lot of streamers are starting to strive to achieve. If you get a faster wide angle lens like a prime, you may even be able to get this down to something like 1.8. However, with the kit lens, the lowest you're going to be able to set your aperture is 3.5. However, with this camera, that gives you plenty of background blur and looks great. For your ISO setting, you want to go ahead and change it from auto to whatever works for your scene. So as you can see, 100, that's too dark. You know, 160, 250, still too dark. So basically, you just want to set this for your lighting. Now, again, if your lighting changes, you may need to adjust your ISO up or down, depending on whether your scene gets brighter or darker. So if you're playing a darker game, again, you might need to turn your ISO up a little bit, as you can see me doing here, to get everything brighter. If you turn on your lights, then you might need to turn it back down. So that just kind of depends on what your lighting situation is. Again, the reason you don't want this set to auto is that, let's say you have your lights on and then you switch to a game and you want it to be dark, like how the screen is right now, instead of super bright. If you have this set to auto, when you turn off your lights, the camera's automatically going to adjust the brightness up so that the scene still looks bright even if the lights are dim. So if you want it so that when it's dark in your room, the viewer sees it as being dark in your room, and when it's bright in your room, the viewer sees it as being bright in your room, then you're going to want to adjust your ISO manually yourself and not allow the camera to take control. While it might still slightly look dark or light in the room, based even on auto ISO. To get the full effect, you're going to want to manually adjust it yourself. Just be aware that if the lighting in your room changes, again, maybe you have a window that lets in natural light, you're going to need to adjust this ISO. So pay attention to your lighting. If that does not matter to you, in terms of what, your lighting doesn't really change and stuff, you could leave your ISO to auto. All right, with that said, guys, that's it. That's all the settings you need to make sure that you're getting the nice, widest, cleanest, best looking image you can get out of your Canon EOS M200. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope it helped you out. Again, if you have any questions at all, please hit me up on my live stream when I'm live, Tuesdays, Thursdays, or Saturday evenings. Link here on the screen or down in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. If this video helped you out, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. If you're not subscribed, do that by hitting the red button below and hit the bell next to it for notifications of when I myself go live or post a new video. And until next time, peace out, everybody.